How are people seeing my screen? That's the first thing. Can I get some thumbs up? If they are. Great. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, tonight we're saying workshop. I'm using that term loosely in the sense that, you know, YorSpace has been going for some time now, and we've got lots of sort of content and lots of things to talk about. And so I could talk about this all night. And but rather than me just do a lot of talking, I thought I would break that up with different opportunities. So for people to ask questions and start discussions. So I'm here this evening to talk about YorSpace. And I'm just going to flick on to the next slide, because I was hoping, I don't know if people had reviewed what was sent out. People are enticed to come in here. So I've put a slide together here to sort of just to group together some of the key things that I can cover. The first one being a very sort of whistle-stop tour of YorSpace for people that might not have heard about the project before, and you know, a bit about how we started and where we're up to currently. And then I've created a whole host of other slides that go into other elements of it a bit deeper, because there's some elements that sometimes are a bit complex about our structure, and so I've grouped that into these basically 3 key areas, and I'll give you a quick summary of those 3 areas now, and then you'll see at point 4 I've actually kept a space there for people to sort of pipe up at this point and say, is there anything in particular that you'd like to know? And I can say whether or not that'll be covered in these 3 topics, and if it isn't, we'll tack that on to the end. We've got loads of time in the program, I believe, to cover stuff tonight if people are willing to stay till 7:30. So yeah. And in terms of the structure for today, we'll probably take a short break after about 40 minutes, and then come back, and then we'll probably check in again at about 7:15 and see if there's any appetite to stay on for longer, or if people need to get off, then they can. But again, I'm willing to stay on a bit after 7:30 if people wanted to too. Yeah, so the topics to cover beyond a short history of what we're doing in York with YorSpace is to talk about our membership and how we've engaged the wider community. We've done quite a lot of that over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. And so we'll be covering things like how we run events, how we've spoken to the local authority, just our general presence. So we'll go into a bit of detail on that and how we've done that over the years. We'll talk about our structure, legal form, and how we organise ourselves. So we're fundamentally a community land trust, but we also work with a housing cooperative as part of our structure. So I can go into a bit more detail on that if people want to know about that. And then project costs and how we've accessed grant funding and raised finance over the time that we've been operating. So and that's mainly the project costs for the project that I'll talk about a lot this evening, which is Lowfield Green, which is the project we're currently working on. So I appreciate this is putting people on the spot a little bit, but is there anything in particular that people had a burning desire to know that they don't feel will be covered by that, by the summaries I've just given for those key areas there? Is there anything that somebody really wants to know about what we're doing that you think might not be covered? Great. I have done a very good job of covering all bases in the presentation. What I'll do is then I'll kick things off with about a sort of 10-minute intro for YorSpace, and then we'll pause for a bit of a break. And if people have questions while we're doing each section, if they drop them in the chat box, then we can collate them at the end, and then we can run through them, and that might spark up other questions. So yeah, keep an eye on the chat box. Lucy's going to be managing that for us. So yeah, don't worry about asking any questions. I'm happy to cover anything this evening. So yeah, great. Thanks, Lucy. Right, so YorSpace, we are a community-led housing project set up in York. We're a community land trust. And we've come around these three ideas or these three principles of being sustainable, affordable, and community focused, something that we think's quite lacking in the current models that are delivering housing, and it's particularly acute in York because York's a particularly expensive place to live. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit through about how we came about. So people have already been mentioned on the call this evening. Lilac. Lilac is a huge inspiration for our project. We were, this was the catalyst for us to start YorSpace off. So me and my friend Sue, she's become friends through this process. We were really captivated by the idea of co-housing, and that's ultimately what YorSpace set out to do. It set out to achieve a co-housing community in York, and I was really excited about. I've got a background in architecture, so I'm really passionate about sustainable construction, and I'd really love that concept that like not only I could live in a straw bale house, but all my neighbours could too. So that was like a big motivation for me. And Lilac, there's so many fantastic elements to Lilac, but also the ownership model is really interesting, and it really goes a long way to start tackling some of the inequalities in home ownership and housing costs. And so we've really taken a lot from how they've set up as an organisation. So and the affordability aspect is quite important. As I mentioned, York is a particularly expensive place to be, and so we've been able to discuss that and to promote that idea and to start challenging people locally to start thinking about different ways, because it is very, very expensive in York. Between 97 and 2017, the average house price went up from 80,000 to over 240,000. So over a 300% rise, and yeah, unless you've been on an amazing salary, no one's income has gone that way. So it has been dubbed the most expensive city in the north by Shelter, and so that's the kind of that's the stratosphere that we're operating in. So we were setting out to find a little parcel of land to build our great co-housing community, and it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult, and so yeah, that sets the scene for York and how we came about, because you kind of get trapped in this cycle. And me as a renter still living in York, that the cost of rent is going up, the cost of living is going up, the house prices are going up, and you kind of get trapped in this kind of Bermuda Triangle, which is kind of hard to get out of. And so we really set out to try and challenge that and to try and come up with different methods and different solutions, and that's why we took a lot of inspiration from how Lilac set up. So how did we start to do that? So as I say, we were naively thinking, oh, this will be fine. We'll just find a site, we'll build our straw bale houses, and it's really not. We looked at a site in 2014, which was owned by a private landowner who was keen to try and work with us. We were unsuccessful at planning application in that summer, and we didn't really succeed. But we hadn't really gone very public with what we were doing. We were kind of probably not aware that we could go public with this, and we could go and speak to the council, and we could try and gain support for what we're trying to do to try and change the agenda of housing. And so we've basically gone out and done a huge amount of public engagement, and the main focus of our public engagement was centered around a project called Oliver House. Now, in the top left-hand corner, you'll see a press article which was released when we were stood outside outside Oliver House back in 2014, 2015. This would have been now, yeah, we went out and we tried to basically garner support for a community buyout. So rather than the council selling off this building that they owned, selling it to the highest bidder, we challenged them to not sell it to the highest bidder, and we felt that it was important that the council should be finding ways to facilitate affordable housing rather than exacerbating the situation by selling off their land to the highest bidder. So we ran a campaign in 2014, 2015, and it wasn't really what we set out to do. Like I say, we were just looking for a site to build our co-housing community, but we realized that we kind of needed to do this to be able to access land at an affordable rate that could mean that the houses would be affordable, because that's one of the biggest issues with housing, is the land value rather than the actual build costs. So yeah, so we've been out in the public eye since sort of 2014, 2015. Lots of public meetings, radio, outreach events, workshops, site visits, promoting what we're about, talking about those ideas of community, affordability, and sustainability. I think we did a pretty good campaign back in 2014, 2015, but unfortunately we were unsuccessful with that pursuit to buy that building. We got a lot of support from the city. We were really, really impressed and touched that, like, so many people thought that, you know, because there'll be times that I'm sure people in this call this evening will think that they might be banging their head against the brick wall, and maybe you're hanging out with a bunch of lunatics because you think that nobody really cares about these things. But it was really heartwarming to hear that people in the city were behind what we were trying to do. And so yeah, we were unsuccessful with this campaign, but the council did do things like they deferred the decision on the sale. It was around about the time of the 2015 election. So we really, we sort of keyed into something that, you know, the local community were really keen to see us succeed in this purchase, because there was community gardens, growing space on the site and things like that. So although we felt that this was a bad sign that the council didn't sell the building to us, they did make a commitment to us at the decision session, where they said that they would actively seek to find us an alternative site. So although it was ultimately an unsuccessful campaign, it did get our foot in the door and ultimately under the table. And so moving forward to 2016, we started working on this project called Lowfield Green. So that by this point we've been unsuccessful over a house. We looked at an earlier site too, as I mentioned, and so this was the first real opportunity where we were engaged at quite an early stage and approached the council and said, well, we've got these self-build plots. Would you be interested in these? And so we've been working with City of York Council since 2016. We took what was going to be 8 self-build plots, and we've transformed that into a site for 19 homes. So we were really demonstrating our ability to make good use of that land, high density, well-designed spaces. And to be fair, we'll come on to talk about the affordability. Like, the only way that we could access to try and get anywhere near the affordability targets that we're working with is because of City of York Council. They didn't sell this land on the open market like they did with Oliver House, and they, you know, there was conditions that were being met in terms of us as a business. We're a not-for-profit. We're looking to house local people. The ownership model means the homes never become unaffordable. So there was lots of benefits for the council to work with us in this. So we've been looking at this site since 2016. The big orange arrow points to the pink spot, if that's helpful, in the sort of southeast corner of the site. And here's a little bit about the design that we developed there. So we're, like I say, I mentioned 19 homes, a mixture of 1, 2, and 3 bed, 1 and 2 bed flats, sorry, and 2, 3, and 4 bed homes. We have our common house, which is the green building on the site plan. We have the sort of common features you see in a co-housing scheme. So we have a shared laundrette, we have guest rooms, we have the big dining kitchen space for, you know, group meetings, film nights. We have a central postage collection point. So, you know, that idea that these homes are designed for that interaction. And we ran workshops with future residents to talk about how they wanted to use the space. We had a really interesting workshop once about how much shared outdoor space and how much private outdoor space people wanted, and the decision we settled on was actually more shared outside space, which is quite interesting and sort of gives the ethos for the kind of community that we're trying to build there. We've designed the homes around One Planet Living principles. I'll come on to talk about this with some of our engagement. We've been very clear and very precise in some of our aims. That's really helped us as an organisation to get our message across. Yeah, so we've got things like, we've only got 12 car parking spaces for the 19 homes. So we are, you know, that's going to be interesting when everyone moves in. You know, we, you know, the homes are quite modest in their size. I said we've crammed quite a lot in on the sites, but we've, you know, we have the guest rooms, we've got the extra laundrette space, we've got the shared common house. Yeah, we've designed in things like sustainable construction materials. We're trying to source our construction materials locally. We're looking at sustainable water. You know, we've designed in areas of food growing, lots of different features to make the home sustainable. And we received planning approval for the development in March 2019. Here's some visuals. I won't dwell too much on this. I do have a background in architecture, so I love these kind of images. But I'll share the slides afterwards. But this is a really nice, I think, visual that oversees where, you know, how the site looks. The small single-story green roof building is the common house. The proposal is that we build that as a community self-build and build that in straw bale construction. We're making plans at the minute to work with the National Organisation for Straw Bale Construction to do things like that. So they're the kind of features we're trying to design in. Loads of cycle storage as well to accommodate the fact that we've only got 12 car parking spaces. So some visuals and a couple more. This is a shot looking at our common house, our community hub, as we're calling it, with the sort of the flats at high level looking down on that space there. And yeah, some more views of the space there. This is this idea of, you know, a car-free space in between the homes, so it's really safe for kids to play out in and what have you. So affordability. So we've I mentioned about the land value and the council working with us on that. We've basically our house value is around 60 to 70% of the local market value, and our monthly repayments are around 80% of the market value. I'll come on a bit later to talk more about the ownership model and mutual home ownership, but you know, basically the headline here is that we're trying to make the homes as affordable as we can. There's no profit involved. We're a not-for-profit organisation, lots of volunteer hours, lots of grant funding, and yeah, so this is our cost to residents. One of the ways that we've made the homes more affordable is by mixing well, varying the mix of funding that comes into the project. And one of the ways in which we've done that is we've, as a community benefit society, we've sold shares in our organisation, and we've sold them to people that wanted to invest. So it gave that community ownership of the scheme. Lots of people are supporting us. You know, we've got over 400 members now for YorSpace, and so people have invested money, so they get a better return that they would get in their savings. And YorSpace can borrow that money at a lower rate than we can borrow it from any commercial lender. So you know, it's got two effects to that. And the way we ran that campaign was that idea that, you know, one of the biggest barriers to home ownership is the deposit, and unless you do have you know, money from the bank of mum and dad, as they call it, you know, it's quite hard for people. So so yeah, the community bank of mum and dad is how we ran the campaign, and we were blown away. Really successful campaign to raise. Our minimum was 375, and we got £422,000 in the end. So we were really delighted by that, and I'll come on a little bit more to talk about that when we break it down. And this, I'm really enjoying this photo at the moment. So we were on site on Friday. This is what happens when you have a socially distant site visit, in that it looks like you're about to do a flash mob dance. So unfortunately, they didn't break out into song or dance after this, but we were on site on Friday, making plans with the council to accommodate us coming on site. We are almost ready to go. We're still trying to finalise some of the costs with our contractor and our consultant team. But we're being stalled at the minute because we are missing a big chunk of our funding. So we've been, since lockdown started, we've been in a bit of limbo. So and that's because the community housing fund, which I'm sure if anyone's been involved in community housing for at least the last year will have heard about this. The government did have it in their manifesto, and unfortunately they haven't followed through with their promise to extend the community housing fund. And again, we'll come on to the mix of the financial breakdown a little bit more later, but we were expecting £850,000 from them to pay for the capital costs of our home, which allows us to hit our affordability targets. So so we've been running a campaign to try and extend that that fund, and we have also been exploring other avenues too. So we're kind of stalled at the minute, which is a bit of a pain because we've done a lot of hard work to get to where we've got to. And yeah, this is just a bit of my personal story. I don't think I've mentioned it, but I'm looking to be a resident of Lowfield Green. So this is the reason that, you know, I set the project up. So you know, we've been getting people in the community to share their stories and to try and apply pressure to the government to extend the fund. If you, I'm sure we'll have circulated it, but if you can, please do write to your MP. It's really important for the sector that that fund gets extended. And I think at that point, oh, well, just a little bit for sort of priorities for the coming year. So we're just about to finalise the purchase of the site from the council. We're going through this transition phase, and this comes on in the section one. We'll talk a little bit about how we are organising ourselves and how our structure works. But there's this transition phase from Lowfield Green being a group of residents to becoming the Mutual Home Ownership Society, and what that involves with the support that YorSpace are offering the co-op. We've, you know, we'll continue to build our links in the sector, and also we've started looking at new sites. So we're at the risk of running before we can walk because we've not quite finished our first one yet. But you know, YorSpace does have aspirations to do more than one site. There's the Community Land Trust, and try and hold land and hold it in perpetuity. I know there's some people on the call this evening that have those aspirations too. So we are looking at future sites, and we have been doing some work at the minute with a project called York Central Co-owned, or YOCO, which is there's a big parcel of land just north of the train station in York, where lots of proposals have been drawn up, but nothing really seems to be there for the community. So we're trying to get our elbows in around the table at the minute, and YorSpace have been successful in accessing some funding to help develop the early stages. So some of you will have accessed the startup fund. So YorSpace have accessed that on behalf of YOCO to try and develop this idea of not only permanently affordable homes, but a permanently affordable neighbourhood. Like, how could you develop a neighbourhood so that businesses can support housing and stuff? So you know, YorSpace, obviously we're very much focused on Lowfield Green and delivering that scheme there, but you know, we are looking to progress as an organisation and looking to grow and extend our reach. So yeah, that kind of brings us up to where we are now. We've been working on YOCO in the last 6 months during lockdown, and there's some really exciting ideas that are coming off there that we can hopefully work on over the coming months. So that is my whistle-stop tour of YorSpace, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen briefly because I thought we might have 5-10 minutes, just questions, comments, discussion, really open for anybody talking about anything. Like I say, we've got a reasonable amount of time in the program. So yeah, how have the questions been coming in, Lisa? Have you had some good things coming in? Oh, hi, Helen.
Yeah, we've had Sylvia had a question which was about how to make projects accessible for disabled people to become members and residents.
Yes, so that is a good question. So the way that we've allowed for that at Lowfield Green is that we've made provisions for all the flats to be fully accessible. So we have lift access for the 5 flats that we have in the development. We've made provision for all the homes to have, you know, toilet and wash facilities on the ground floor of the properties. We didn't, our budget couldn't extend to lifetime homes, but that was something that was discussed at one point. Lifetime homes is a really good model where homes can become adaptable. And I think Joe Atkinson might have touched upon that a little bit in his session he did on Lilac a few months ago about how the co-op makes those amendments to the structure of the buildings to allow for changes in life and things. And I think that will evolve for us at Lowfield Green, I think. But yeah, in terms of the actual plans in there at present at Lowfield Green, it's mainly the flats that are fully accessible, really. We've not engaged anything further on that. Does that answer the question, Sylvia?
I also wanted to ask really about not just about people with physical disabilities, but incorporating people right from the start with, say, mental health needs, or well, can be any of us. at any stages of our lives, especially the stresses and strains that are around at the moment. How do you incorporate people in the planning and the involvement and right from the start, as wide and accessible a group as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to open this out for people to discuss, but the one bit of experience that I can put forward, and I don't think, well, yeah, I think that it would be fair to say that some people in our community at Lowfield Green have suffered with mental health difficulties. Myself, I had burnout last year with you know, one of the root causes with this project, and I think that I'll come on to talk about how we've structured ourselves, but for us, we have a community team which is all about trying to create a strong community cohesion, and so putting in checks and balances that people, so there's a space and there's a team or there's a person that someone can go and speak to about their mental health, because yeah, I think it's been a particularly hard year, and I think it's really affected a lot of people, and that's come through with just the group that we're working with now. So in terms of how we're trying to be inclusive in that respect, is that we're just being a little bit more thoughtful in terms of, because ultimately people are volunteering their times to get this project off the ground, and that's really hard to force people to do things when they're not getting paid, or and it's commitments, and I think that people have things that happen in their lives that can be quite challenging. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that in terms of how you can embed that in, but it's not something that we've ultimately set out to do. It hasn't been a primary aim, but we have always tried to have that strong sense of community. So yeah.
Could I come back as well? I was thinking about involving people, not just with the startup and being initial residents, but how as people get older, or things happen and people can become disabled or unable to manage, and they need carers and so on. How are you preparing for that? And I know I asked this question of OUCH, the older women's co-housing, the older women's co-housing in east of London, and they said they'd signed powers of attorney, so that if they lost abilities, say to manage finances or something, then that could be done. But I mean, I would very much want to have something which was set up co-housing that could be a lifetime home, whatever might happen.
It's funny, our community team at the minute are working on essentially what's called a community contract, and we're looking at the leases between residents and how those, we'll come on to talk about mutual home ownership, but I don't think the leases will extend to that, but it's not something that I've heard discussed, but I can't see why that wouldn't be able to be factored in if that was a key aim and objective from the organisation that we're setting up the housing. Because obviously OUCH was a slightly different beast in that it was primarily for older women and people that needed care. So yeah, that's a good question. It's a really good question, and I don't have a very clear answer, but I know that there's certain things that I hope with the co-housing community, any of that kind of thing, will deal with those kind of things as a community. And I don't know if you've got any experience of that, Bill, in terms of if this has been a topic for discussion at Chaco, or
not specifically. No, we've said that Chaco isn't intended to be a care community in that sense. So if individuals get to a stage in life where they need consistent, regular care, then that's not what Chaco is for. We're for looking out for each other, but we're not replacing normal provision of ongoing care.
Alison had some practical queries. Do you want to chat about those, Alison, or shall I just read it? You do.
I might as well do it. Yeah. So sorry, mine's really practical. it's not
okay.
the sort of and the kind of stuff. So mine were about roughly what was the cost of the land as a percentage of the open market value, James? Because you mentioned you got it sort of directly from the council as opposed to them putting it out. And I was also then interested in, was the build cost the same as the selling prices that you shared, or have they been subsidised? And then lastly, who's designed the homes and what type of build is it? Is it modular? Is it a brick, sort of traditional brick build? So very pragmatic.
No, it's good. It's good. It's very good. So in terms of percentage of the land cost, so we basically, the land was valued for the 8 self-build plots, I think, at £450,000. And because the approach that we were taking in terms of the ownership model, we're a community business, not for profit, we have wound up paying £300,000 for the land. So, which roughly equates to about 14 grand a plot, which is pretty good. Yeah, that was the land value question. In terms of the build cost, the same as selling price. Yeah, basically whatever it costs to buy the land, pay for the consultant fees, build the homes, any of the other costs associated with the development minus any grant funding received is what the residents pay. So yeah, there's a little bit of additional money that comes in to YorSpace for future developments, but it's a small fraction. It's about, I think it may be £4,000 to £5,000 a year as a sort of CCOM funding for future developments, as a transaction between the co-op and YorSpace. But I'll go into that a little bit more shortly. And the final question is, I'll talk about the consultant team, but the consultant team that designed the homes were native architects. I was fortunate enough that I worked for native architects at the time. So we got some nice free pro bono work for a few years before Lowfield Green came along. And the type of build is, we're going for a timber frame construction, and we're just finalising the details. It's been a long drawn out process, but we're committed to bio-based construction materials. So we're looking at hempcrete and wood fibre. And I mentioned the common house being built from straw. So yeah. And it's one more, and I think Helen was waving too.
And Paul would like to know how many of the team are likely to go on to be residents at Lowfield.
Yeah, so of the current YorSpace board, it's myself and Sue, but then there's about, well, we've got 19 homes, and I think we've got 17 that are full now. We've got 17 households worth of people committing to the development as part of Lowfield Green Housing Co-op. So yeah, so we've only ever had 2 people on the board that were looking to be residents at YorSpace. Yeah, and we've committed in our business plan that we were going to maintain that. So whenever a future development comes, that we would try and encourage future residents that were wanted to be proactive and work at a strategic level to be on the YorSpace board, because then it feels as though there's a stake in the organisation, and you know, there's more transparency and accountability at that level. Yeah. And Helen, you were waving.
Yes, I was. I would just to say that that Spare Handle, our co-housing project, was basically motivated by the setting up of it. Was basically motivated by the idea of a way of dealing with older care, you know, of maintaining one's independence as long as possible within a community, and so we have discussed it. I mean, obviously we've not made any legal commitments at all yet, but we have discussed how we might do that. And I suppose what we're thinking is that we don't want everybody to be of an older age. It's not like the Ouch project where everybody's over 55, but we're not expecting the younger people to do the caring as such, although there'll be a certain amount of, you know, maybe shopping, or there could be some mutual support obviously involved, but that if there are several people, for instance, who need outside help, you could buy that in. You could, we could buy that in as a community or as those individuals, but sharing costs would give you possibly the option of employing your own staff, your own carers, rather than being reliant on agency staff who might come in for an hour a day. You could say, or less, usually 20 minutes or something for a visit. You could arrange that so that you get the care that you need. And it should be cheaper if you've got several people involved, really. And you're more likely to be able to control that care. I mean, I suppose there still might come a time when people could not be cared for within the community, but that's what will be our hope, that we could maintain it. And also, I think there's quite good evidence that the mere fact of being socially engaged really helps with people maintaining their mental health as they age.
I'm just wondering, Helen, it might be a good idea to connect yourself with Cynthia and Shangri Leeds. If this is something that you're both talking about, might be a good opportunity there.
It's also something that Project Freedom are looking at as well.
I was going to ask, actually, Karen. I'm glad you skipped. I wasn't feeling brave enough to think that I knew enough, but I thought you might be. Yeah. So that might be a good thing to set up there. And have you got anything to share with how you've been thinking about that?
Well, part of our project, although it will be multi-generational, the majority of it will be for care and extra care. And one of the things that we are looking at doing is setting up a social enterprise that will just look after the care of the residents, but even possibly taking that out into the community as well, particularly because of the specific requirements of LGBT members of the community as far as care is concerned. So it would be something that would be staffed by LGBT members of the community and their allies, so that it's tailored specifically to the needs of the community in that respect. But the intention of the build is that there will be homes for life, and that homes will be adaptable as the situation of your health changes. And that's the plan. It's one of our main aims from that point of view. But yes, it would definitely be good to get together with Helen and Sylvia and discuss it further, I think, because there's some mutual ground there.
Yeah, definitely up for that.
Great. Well, we'll sort that out, won't we, Lucy?
Yeah. Is that okay then for me to do an introduction for you three to by email, so you can contact each other? Yeah.
Okay, Maggie.
Excellent. Some more members of the community-led housing fraternity connecting. Excellent. I'm conscious of time, so I've got the three areas that I'm going to run through. I think I'm going to run through the first one quite quickly, and then give an opportunity for people who want to go for a quick comfort break, and then we'll rush through the last couple too, and then have a discussion afterwards if people are up for it. So the next item on my agenda was growing the membership and sort of community outreach. I'm going to share my screen again. We're talking for about 5 minutes on this, I think, but happy to answer questions. So as I mentioned in the intro before, we've really, we've grown from a sort of was it 5 of us on the street here where I live in York, to, I think actually I say over 400. I think we've had some more people sign up recently, but well over 400 members, and it's been that's been really, really exciting to see it evolve. So since we became a community benefit society in 2017, we've really grown, and we've got lots of different types of members. So we do have our board of directors who are responsible at a sort of strategic level, and we also have our working teams, people that are doing things around engaging the wider community. We have our Lowfield Green housing co-op team now, and basically we there's lots of meetings, lots and lots of meetings, but we also try and do outreach events. So in the top left corner, you'll see an event that we did. This is way back in February of 2018 now, where we were consulting our membership on our allocations policy and what people felt was important to us as members. And so we've got lots of different types of members. The people that are volunteering their time who don't want a home. So this kind of goes back to answer the question previously. Lots of people on our board, they're just great people, and then there's people like me who are in it for the houses. So yeah, and you know, people come and go. People, you know, we've had a real sort of churn over people, especially in the last sort of 12 months as new members have come in, because you know, it's starting to make it more real that the homes are going to be built. So yeah, we've got lots of different ways for people to engage to become members of YorSpace. I mentioned the outreach that we've done previously in terms of us going out, being in the press, being on the radio. We have our AGM and we try to bolt on things like a speaker, or we try and make it a bit more fun than the boring, typical standard AGM kind of agenda. We do things like that fantastic photo op that we did in the bottom right hand corner on the screen here, where I mentioned One Planet Living principles. We've been making connections. So One Planet York is a network of businesses in York, so we found a way to promote what we're doing through that network too. Yeah, getting out there, being visible, being really shameless about saying, yeah, I'll go and speak to those people. And that was particularly important during the share offer phase and generating support that way. Yeah, and we the top right hand corner as well, we do like visits out to the site, like try and encourage people to come and see what it is that we're doing to make it real, because sometimes it feels very abstract when we're talking about community-led housing, because it takes a long time and there doesn't seem to be much progress. But things like that, where we can go on site and show plans and say, this is where it's going to be, we're speaking to the people, it's really, really, really good. And actually, one of the things that I touched upon in the previous thing was in the previous set of slides was engaging the community. So around Bishop Hill, and how we did that with, you know, they were going to go and try and bid for Oliver House, and then we came forward with our proposal and they said, oh, we like that better, so they backed us. So, you know, and that person at Bishop Hill was the first person to say, why don't you just go and speak to your councillors about it? Why don't you go and try and find some, and I didn't even know you could do that. Like, we're just like, and he was like, no, that's literally their job. Like the councillors, you go and tell them what your concerns are and what you want for your city. And that was like a real game changer for YorSpace. Like, we didn't realize that we could go and be asking and speaking and communicating to the council like that. So we found that really a really effective way. I mentioned the meetings. Yeah, lots of food, lots of tea, biscuits. That's what it's fueled by, basically, community-led housing. And we found as well that having shared meals before or after meetings was a really good way for us to build those social bonds, and for give an extra reason for someone to come out on a cold winter night to come and talk about allocations policies and governance and things like that. So yeah, and we've done lots of workshops with residents as well regarding the design of the homes. That's been a good way for us to engage people. And then we've gone and talked to the wider membership about where we've been getting to and getting their input too. So that's a really good way to go out and get new members. And yeah, I mean, I did talk about this previously, but the biggest thing that we can point to is our engagement with the council and our engagement in that campaign, because we were very polite, but we very publicly shamed the council for what they were doing with selling Oliver House to the highest bidder. And I think it was a bit bold. We probably made just as many friends as we made enemies within the council with that approach. But and I'm not suggesting that everybody should go out and do this, but that was the thing that was a real catalyst for us. We went and we were just we made, as Sue says, we made a very polite fuss about the housing crisis in the city, and yeah, that was quite successful for us to do that. And then finally, just thinking about our you know, we're in the 21st century now, aren't we? And our media presence, you know, our social media presence, our website, you know, there's opportunities for people to sign up to become members. So I'm just going to go into, you know, this is our website that was rebranded for our share offer, but, you know, we have our website that communicates what we're about. You know, we have a video, which I won't play for you now, but gives a bit more about the project. You know, we have a blog that we add to, that again is just a new way to engage people. We got as many people as all those outreach events that I could remember to just sign up. It's a bit different now. GDPR came in obviously a couple of years ago, but getting people to sign up and getting their email addresses was such an important thing for us in those early days of YorSpace, and we still got a really strong big old long list of supporters on our mailing list that we use. So we use MailChimp to do things like that, send out resources, point people to our website. Yeah, we've got a donate button on our website, which some people started to use now, and we're also promoting the available homes at Lowfield Green via that website too. But we have our we also have our social media presence. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. That was really powerful for us during the share offer. Lots of interest, and so having someone who knows in your team a little bit about social media, those people that you think probably, I'm going to say the younger people are more familiar with, the digitally, what's the word? What's the phrase? Digitally.
Challenge?
Come on, Lucy. No, well, yeah, I suppose that, well, clearly I am digitally challenged. The digital natives, that's the phrase I'm looking for.
Oh,
the no. Generation with all that stuff. So, but yeah, so I mean, I'm sure some of those are sort of seem pretty obvious, but yeah, there's yeah, and Bill's just said there in the chat as well, getting ward councils on board is really essential. So they were some of the ways in which YorSpace went out and made themselves known publicly, and that was really, 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 really good for us. So I don't know if anyone have any comments or feedback. Shall I skip on to the legal form? Do people want to have a very quick break, just to go to the toilet, get a drink? What are people feeling? Bill's off now anyway. Thanks, Bill. I would quite like a quick wee break, so that might be the catalyst for this. But should we try and aim to come back at 5? The next thing to touch upon, and this is the bit that gets no, hopefully I'm presenting this in an uncomplex way, is our structure and legal form. So I'm going to share these slides afterwards so people can have them with some people that helped us create some really nice visuals for this. But this is just an opportunity for I suppose this is more for the organisations that might be interested in doing multiple developments, which is what YorSpace's aim is. So am I sharing my screen? I'm not, am I? There we go, I'll share my screen, it's a good thing. So so here we go, yeah. So a structure and legal form. So this is our version of community-led development at YorSpace. YorSpace, which is a community land trust, but its legal form is a community benefit society, which allows us to do all those things I was saying earlier around raising share capital. But the main premise of it is that it's one member, one vote, and we're a community-owned business, and any assets that we own are for the benefit of the community. And if ever anything goes wrong, it sells up and it gets given to some other nominated part of the community. So it's a really we think it's a really good structure, this really nice not-for-profit society that we are. And the way that we're set up is that we, YorSpace takes grant funding. It utilises local investors, like I talked earlier about the share offer. Potential residents join YorSpace, they're involved. There's just other people who, like I said, who do volunteering, and also City of York Council that are working with us to find parcels of land, or they have helped us find one parcel of land. So, and the way that it works is that YorSpace, as a community benefit society and the outward-looking community business, does a lot of the work that I've been talking about in terms of bringing forward the site, getting planning permission, working out the financial model, and then it buys land on the basis of that financial model and leases it to mutual home ownership societies. So you might have come across mutual home ownership societies before when people have talked about Lilac. I know Granby 4 Street, or I think Granby 4 Streets, you are utilising mutual home ownership. I'll come on to explain that ownership, but basically it's a way for people to live in co-ops to accrue equity in a development in a way that if you want to realise that equity, not everybody has to sell up and move on. So it's a way for for those communities to stay and maintain and keep going. So, and like I say, the ambition, long-term ambition, is for YorSpace to develop a series of these communities, and the first one being Lowfield Green. So mutual home ownership and how that works, I want to just talk through these slides. Like I say, I'll share. The way mutual home ownership works is it's somewhere between renting and owning. How it works is that when you move in, you pay your deposit and you make your monthly repayments like you would do if you bought a house. However, you don't directly own your own home. You own the mutual home ownership society that owns your home. So in the first development, that will be Lowfield Green Housing Co-op. And yeah, so that's basically that's the transaction. You don't own your own house, but you collectively own the organisation that owns your house. The way that it works is that when a resident wants to come in, they come and make their deposit and their monthly repayments into the mutual home ownership society, and then equity is returned. So there's we'll come into the breakdown a little bit more, but basically, you know, the monthly repayments that you make, some of that will go towards maintenance, some of that will go towards paying off shareholders, some of that will go in towards paying off a development loan, and then what's left at the end, you generate in equity. And what's really powerful about this is that because the mutual home ownership society controls the properties, the mutual home ownership society means that they control the value of them, so that the homes are designed to never become ludicrously expensive. They'll never, the equity will never be sold on the open market. And so it's a really good way of controlling the value of the property. So those property values I shared with you earlier, so for example, a 3-bed, which is £140,000, in reality, that's worth probably £350,000, £400,000, but that's not what we're marketing it at because we're not selling them. And then as over time, the value of that will only rise 2.5% each year. So not only are they affordable for the first generation, but they're affordable for the generation and generation after that. When somebody wants to leave, they can, obviously. It'd be weird if they couldn't. But it doesn't, the transaction doesn't operate in the way that it typically would. As I say, if you were selling on the open market, then the resident that's leaving would have to ensure that there's someone who's coming to take their shares before they can leave, basically. So the new resident that comes in, they would pay their deposit, make their monthly repayments, but before that transaction occurs, the co-op would refinance, pay back the leaving resident their equity, and then the new person would come in with their deposit and monthly repayments. So it's a way to sort of recycle that affordability. I'm really happy to take questions and discussion after this on that, because I went to a workshop on Lilac maybe 7 years ago, and halfway through the workshop my mind had melted with the complexity of it all. So we have tried to make it simpler with YorSpace, but I'm happy to talk through the semantics of MHOS a little bit after this. So do pop your questions in the chat box. So yeah, so we're bringing that model here to Lowfield Green, and so we're buying the land off the council, YorSpace, and then we're going to own the land. That's all YorSpace essentially does. YorSpace only owns the land, but it has obviously done a lot of the pre-development works to get to where we've got to now. So I mentioned the share offer. The principal aim of the share offer was to raise the capital to buy the land. And this diagram communicates how that works. So City of York Council are selling the land to YorSpace. YorSpace have sold shares to our membership, in which that has generated money into YorSpace for us to purchase the land off the council. And then YorSpace leases the land to the co-op in order for the co-op to build the homes on. And we were successful in getting some community share booster money to generate our business plan, and we also got some money from the Community Land Trust Fund to help develop this ownership model. It's unique to the UK. It's not been done before, where a community benefit society CLT is linked to a housing cooperative like this. So that's how the share offer works, and that's the principal aim of it, was to buy the land. And then how that works in terms of how that money is paid back. So as I mentioned, the share capital investment comes into YorSpace via the investors, and then the lease, so 999-year lease, YorSpace leases the land to the co-op, and then the co-op then has those individual leases with the residents, and then the residents makes those monthly contributions back into the co-op for their residency, and then there will be the equity that accrue, but also the money that goes back to repay the deferred premium and rent back to YorSpace, and then that money over time gets paid back to the investors. So this is how YorSpace generates the money to pay back the investors, as a loan lease agreement between YorSpace and the co-op. That's probably a good point to pause at. How are we doing for time? 15 minutes. And it's probably best if I keep these slides up, but does anybody, I may have lots of questions. Does that make sense, that ownership model? Are there any questions on that?
Can I ask a question, James? It's Alison here.
Hi, Alison.
Do you lease the land to the co-op? Is there a cost to the lease, or are you doing it on a can't remember what the terminology is, but you know, like £1 for the year or something like that?
No, so that's how. So the value of the lease. So there's a loan lease agreement between the Lowfield Green Housing Co-op and YorSpace CLT. The value of that lease is paid back over 25 years, which is the time period for which we are due to pay our investors back. So basically the value of the lease covers the cost of us paying back the interest to our investors. So I think it's around £600,000 is the transaction, and that's over the course of a 25-year period.
And then would the land be done on a sort of much cheaper base? The lease of the land be cheaper back to the co-op after they've paid off over 25 years?
That's a good question, actually. I mentioned before there's I think about £5,000 a year from £5,000 of the money that's paid to YorSpace for the lease over the course of a year goes towards seed corn funding for future developments, just to give, to try and get some financial sustainability into YorSpace, because what we're currently witnessing is we're incredibly dependent on grant funding. So that's in there, and that's a good question. I honestly don't know. We're not sure whether all the investors will want their money back at that point. Some people will the way the share offer works is that people can withdraw 5%, or we can allow 5% a year to leave in order for us to stay financially solvent. That's what we've got in our model. So not everybody can get all their money back at one hit, but we're assuming people are going to just take out their 5% at the point at which they can. But that is a very good question. You would think.
Well, I'm glad to have asked one that was
no, really good.
I need to think about.
I'm going to write that one down. But no one's ever asked us that before. But no, yeah, that's I couldn't see why it wouldn't. Interesting. Yeah.
It's Paul here. Can I ask a quick question?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, of course.
I'm just trying to work out whether any movements in the wider housing market, either house price inflation or a crash, has any impact on this, or is it totally separate from the housing market? It's not right to think about it in the same way at all.
Yeah,
I just haven't thought it through yet. So
yeah, so the idea is that basically this insulates the co-op from any crashes like that. So obviously you don't get the benefits of the rise in value, but also you don't get hit hard with any issues around negative equity, because the value of the property isn't linked to the local house prices. It's like I say, in the model it goes up 2.5% every year, the value of the property, and which is roughly inflation. At one point it was going to be pegged to inflation, but it's just stuck at 2.5%. That was the way for us to get the model to work. So yeah, and there's potentially the issue with this type of model is that people perceive that they could be trapped in this type of, if they've lived in a co-housing community like this, it uses MHOS for 25-30 years. Are they going to have enough money to be able to buy another house if the markets continue to go at the trajectory that it has? So there's that sort of risk, but I genuinely don't know what's going to happen. There is the boom and bust mentality of the housing market. But yeah, in short, it should insulate us from those issues. But the key aim is that the homes never find their way onto the open market, and that's, for us, that's the key. And I think that that's one of the biggest issues with the right to buy, is that stock has never been replenished. And I think that this we think goes some way to sort of counteracting that. Yeah. Great. So we are at 7:20. There's a bit about how we structure ourselves. This was the second part of this bit. Would that be interesting for people to hear about? Yeah. This will probably take us to this probably, actually, the organisation will probably take us 5 minutes to talk through, and then there's 5 minutes at the end. I've not done very well on time management this evening, unfortunately, guys. But if I do this final bit for this section, and then if people want to stay on to and they've got appetite for it, I've got some breakdown of the costs a bit more, so people can understand where we've got grant funding from and how we did that and things like that. So in terms of how we organise ourselves, this goes on a little bit more to explain the relationship between the Mutual Home Ownership Society and YorSpace. So we have a hub and spoke system with YorSpace. It's evolved, I'll admit. It's changed. The team names have changed a lot over the course of the project. Each team has a different, we've had various teams membership. We've had legal, we've had financial. No one ever wanted to be in financial. We have what else? We had outreach. We've had lots of different names for things, but we've actually changed this recently to we've just got 3 teams, which is affordability, community, and sustainability, and that's actually really worked really well. There is a subgroup team that's developed that's focusing on legals, on the leases, the relationship between the co-op and YorSpace, and also co-op and the residents. But basically the route into getting involved and becoming a resident of Mutual Home Ownership Society that YorSpace develops is becoming a member of YorSpace and joining a working team and being involved that way. That's a really good route in. At the minute with Lowfield Green, because we're so far on now and we're talking in quite detail around the finances, and some of those discussions are quite sensitive. Most of the people involved in those discussions are residents only, but there was a time before the plans developed further and it got into discussions around personal finances and people actually being physically allocated a house. People were just contributing to the project in any way they could before the homes were allocated. So so it's a combination of YorSpace and Lowfield Green working together in tandem. So the YorSpace board is one element, one side of things. And then there's also the Lowfield Green Housing Co-op Committee, and basically these two organisations work hand in hand. So the hub basically is where the Lowfield Green Housing Co-op sits, and YorSpace feeds into that now. But we've slightly rejigged that structure again recently, so it's an ever-evolving system. But it's because we're adapting and we're being we're responding to the change and the challenge as things come along. So. So that's how we work in terms of the structure. So I'm going to talk a bit about the timeline. So there's pre-development, development, and post-development. So YorSpace has been involved from day one in terms of finding those sites, running those campaigns, trying to do the negotiations with the council, get the grant funding in place. The Mutual Home Ownership Committee was formed last year at the point not long after we got planning, and it was looking like it was actually going to happen. So the committee was formed, and Lowfield Green Housing Co-op was created as an entity, as a fully mutual housing co-op. So that's when the MHOS committee started working with the board. And just to clarify the phases, pre-development is essentially anything up to planning is what we would probably term pre-development. The development phase would be the technical design phase, working out the costs, appointing the building contractor, working with them to finalize the costs, sign the contract, and then build the homes. And then post-development is that point at which everyone's moved in. The MHOS takes a bit more responsibility in terms of running the show, and YorSpace is essentially the landlord at that point. But yeah, so this hopefully gives a feel for how there's different elements. So at the point at which the home is finished, the hub is obsolete, and the MHOS set up their own working teams at that point. So YorSpace will just leave the co-op to it. So the idea being that the co-ops have got the mutual home ownership societies will have their own autonomy, they'll have their own rules and regulations, and they're in charge. They can do what they want with their houses as long as they make those repayments for us to pay back our investors. YorSpace are happy. So that's the organizational structure, and this, I suppose, communicates the same thing again, but possibly in a clearer way, in that, initially it was YorSpace, and the co-op was kind of there because people that were going to be part of the co-op were part of YorSpace, and now the two organizations are working together to deliver that. So YorSpace is going to be sitting alongside the co-op when the homes are being built, for example, and offering support, and then afterwards, like I say, YorSpace takes a back seat and the co-op is running the show, essentially. So that's how the stage of the development work. So that's a little bit about the relationship and the stage of the development. It is changing. I must admit, I've spent a long time doing lots of different mind maps and charts and all these things, how people can do stuff, and we seem to have settled more recently on this idea of the 3 teams, and it does seem to be helping and focusing people. Sometimes we ran the risk of creating working teams for the sake of having working teams because we needed a legal team. Well, the legal team haven't got anything to look at. Why are they there, kind of thing? So we've gone through quite an evolution on that front, and also the complexity of the 2 organisations with Lowfield Green and YorSpace working together. There's been some teething problems with that, but it's only going to make us stronger for the next one because we've got quite a lot of learning from that. Yeah. Any questions? Great. Well, I'm happy to.
Nothing in the chat.
Yeah, no, I had a quick check there myself. I must be explaining this very well.
Seamless.
So if people have the appetite for it, it is 26 minutes past 7. I can now go through a little bit more in detail about who we worked with, how the capital costs break down, how we funded that, how we've been successful in getting funding, if people are keen to hear that. If we can get a thumbs up or a nod or a... Yeah, okay, good.
Sylvia's just put a quick question in. How do you make decisions?
Yes. So have I got a chart for that? In theory, the Lowfield Green Housing Co-op use sociocracy. So I don't know if people have come across sociocracy, but it's a form of decision making. Thanks, Paul. It's a method of decision making that uses consent decision making. Slightly different from consensus in that the idea is that you still move forward, but you revisit a decision if you can within a few months. And we've been using sociocratic structures to organize our meetings. So we have how people move between meetings and that idea of the hub and what have you. We've been using those structures, but actually in the meetings and the decision we've been making, we haven't really been using sociocratic principles. It's mainly been democracy and voting and using workshops for people to talk through things. But to answer the question that's come back again from Cynthia, it's one person, one vote is how it works. And that's how we're making the decision currently. So one of the big things we're deciding at the moment is to finalise the building materials and what impact that has on the costs for the residents, not just the capital costs, but the running costs. And so yes, we've had lots of workshops. People send out Google Forms. So we use Google Forms a lot for questionnaires for people to put their comments, to vote for a particular way, and then we take a view on that, and then we push forward, and then we offer people the opportunity to ask us or challenge us on it. Yeah, so that's how we make decisions, essentially. I think we'd like to evolve the sociocracy more. It's quite difficult to do that when we've got so many new people coming in at the time we have, because the homes have got planning and they look like they're going to start building. So we've had a big influx of residents in the last 12 months, you see. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Does that include children who are of the residents?
Oh yeah, no, it doesn't actually. No, it doesn't. It's every adult member of the co-op votes. Yeah. Okay. Oh, thanks, Helen. You off? Bye. So, any more questions on the structure or decisions or anything like that? Because you've really stuck it out to the end. The gritty costs and funding. So I'll just share my screen again now. If I can. Yeah, we can. There we go. So can you see all that? Is that okay? Yep. Okay, good. So costs. So people mentioned, so someone asked before about consultants, about which architect we use. So this is a list of all the people that have contributed, in the top half anyway, all the people that have contributed to the project in terms of our architects, our landscape architects, our project management, our solicitors, 2 sets of solicitors. We've got YorSpace, we've got solicitors, the co-op have got solicitors. We spent an awful lot of money on solicitors' fees. Don't try and create a new legal form and financial model, because you'll get hammered for solicitors' fees, would be my advice. But you know, we've worked with the business co-op business advisors. Our mechanical electrical consultants help with our you know, our energy and heating systems and things like that. We're working with building surveyors and quantity surveyors to help with managing our costs. And then one of the latest members of our team is Croft Farm Construction. They're the contractor that we're working with. So we conducted a tender process in which we're now in the second phase of that tender, and we're agreeing a cost with the contractor to deliver the scheme for us. In terms of funding, I mentioned the Community Shares Booster program. I think that's still going, actually. That was £10,000 up front to develop our business model, to then help us do our share offer, and then they actually match funded £100,000, which is amazing. So for the first £100,000 that we generated, they invested £100,000. So that was a very good day when we hit 100,000. We went up to 200,000. That was a very good day for the share offer. We've accessed funding from Power to Change. Fortunately, their Homes and Communities Hand program isn't back online yet, but they're a good source for funding. Locality gave us the initial startup fund. We had £10,000 to develop outline proposals for the first scheme at Lowfield Green. They also gave us then an additional 40,000 to work up a bit more detail to get us to planning. Reach fund, that was for us to again market the share offer. We were actually very fortunate. Actually, we got double funded for developing our share offer and our business model and marketing and running the share fund. Unlimited, if you've got someone who's particularly shameless and doesn't mind considering themselves a social entrepreneur, they can put themselves forward for funding from Unlimited, and then they'll help fund the development. So we had some, I think in total we've had about £20,000 from Unlimited. They funded us to start up. They actually funded us to become a community benefit society and support us. And the National CLT Network too. We are members of the National CLT Network, and they've given us some funding to help develop the financial model and set up the co-op and things like that. So yeah, and Leeds Community Homes have been really supportive of us too. I know lots of you know about this call through Leeds Community Homes, but they've helped us with support. You know, sometimes when we've had some small bills that have been paid, Leeds Community Homes have been incredibly supportive on that front too. This is me with my YorSpace hat on in that front. And what we're really hoping for, and I mentioned it before, is the Community Housing Fund in Homes England. That's going to be the big one for us. We were successful in getting some revenue funding to develop our finalise our details for construction details. £120,000 we got from Homes England. We're desperate for the next big capital fund from them. So yeah, so they're the people that we're working with, and hopefully that's a good indication of some of the funding pots. I know that the advisors that you're working with, Leeds Community Homes, will give you some of the names of different funds that have come through. So the capital cost breakdown for Lowfield Green. So I mentioned the land value earlier of £300,000. We have a stamp duty. Interestingly, well, people might find this interesting, they might not. The reason we've gone about the process that we have to lease the land to the co-op, for the co-op to build the homes rather than just YorSpace building the homes and then giving it off to the co-op was to avoid us a massive big stamp duty land tax bill, which would have been on the completed value of the homes, which would have been 3.5 million rather than 300,000. So there was some good advice we got at that point, but that has caused lots of complications too, but ultimately it saved us a lot of stamp duty tax. You'll see, actually, sorry, I didn't say before I started going through the table, but we split the costs between the YorSpace and YorSpace and the MHOS to try and clarify where responsibility lies. So yeah, so I mentioned the stamp duty there. So the development costs. So the actual development cost there, the breakdown, that's 2.6 million for the whole build. So that's going to be everything but the single-story common house building, which is going to be a community self-build, and we're going to try and self-fund that, because one of the things about co-housing is trying to make it affordable is difficult, because the common house is essentially a big, huge luxury item in many ways. So we've tried to find a creative way to fund that by accessing funding to build that as a community self-build. So all those development costs, the development cost that YorSpace is covering there is the cost of the car park. So that's part of the deal that we're the 36,000 there. Fees, the fees that we've generated, a lot of those have been professional fees. So I mentioned solicitors, I mentioned the architects, quantity surveyors, all those fees. We've been very successful in getting grant funding for those. We've been very fortunate. The timing of our development, again, another reason for the CHF to be extended is that revenue funding, that at-risk funding that was so critical for us to get to where we got to. So yeah, so those fees, a lot of them have been covered by grant funding, but there'll be the cost of the MHOS will cover the 52,000 of all the fees during the development phase when we're on site. There's always a contingency fee in there. In order for us to generate the money through our community share offer, we used FX to host off our share off money. So there was a fee involved in that, and then there's some other things around corporation tax, working capital, and development interest, which yeah, they're just all costs. But they're our total costs, and that's how it splits between YorSpace and the MHOS in terms of those costs. I put this in here because this is a reference to the funding and why we've been successful in accessing the grant funding. And this is the thing that I talk about with groups that I'm working with now, because I'm obviously part of YorSpace, but I'm now an accredited advisor and I work with different groups. It's being very clear and communicating very well about why it is you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing it and what it is that you're doing. And we've been very good at, so I mentioned One Planet Living principles. I mentioned our 3 areas of community, sustainability, affordability. Very clear. It felt like when we were writing funding applications, it really rolled off the tongue. We had a very clear set of, it was, you know, once we ran that campaign with the council, we realized what people were supportive of. We were very effective in communicating that. So that's just a little thing in there to say to people when you're looking for funding, is just be really clear about why it is you're doing what you're doing, and then you'll find that it's quite easy to find funding from that point, or it was for us. So yeah, so I mentioned our affordability, community, sustainability. I'm heavily influenced by permaculture, so that was something that was in the early formation of YorSpace and how we started to gather our thoughts and thinking. So that's something that might be recommended to look at in terms of when you're communicating your message. And again, our vision, we did a similar thing: community, sustainability, affordability. So I think these were just in here to sort of communicate that we really drove it home what it was that we were about. So the funding that we generated to pay for Lowfield Green, this is how we cover the costs. So I mentioned the community shares. We didn't quite reach our target of 475, but it means that the co-op are going to have to borrow a little bit more money. So it did up the cost slightly for the residents, but you know, it was £50,000 and not £475,000 that's gone into that. I mentioned the grants. We've been successful with £300,000 worth of pre-development grants through YorSpace. The big one is the £855,000 there for the MHOS. That's what we're waiting for, and we are a bit stalled at the minute without that. We've tried to rerun the numbers recently, and we've had some really empowering but difficult discussions and workshops with the community where you know, we're asking the community, how do we resolve this? How much more can you afford to pay? We're not a housing association, or we're not a typical developer. If it just costs more, you have to pay more. We built this community, so we're trying to find ways in which we can stick to those affordability targets that we set out earlier in the slides. So it's really interesting how we've run those numbers, and we've come to the conclusion that we need most of, if not all of that, £855,000. So resident deposits, so people put in 10% of their property value. That's how people access the development. So for me and my partner, we're looking at a 4-bed house, so our deposit would be £14,000, which is incredibly good locally, because I think the national average is 15% for your deposit. And I mean, 2-bed houses on the street that we're on here are going for £275,000, and we're getting a 3-bed for £140,000. So we're very happy. And then the rest of the funding comes from the mortgage, so the development loan. So we're speaking to Charity Bank and Ecology Building Society. Ecology Building Society are incredibly helpful. We're also trying to access some borrowing from the council to help bridge our funding gap. The Public Works Loan Board. If you do have a contact in the council, it might be worth pursuing whether or not you can access money from them. We haven't secured that yet, but we might. I know there's been some other CLTs up and down the country that have done that. The theory is that you can borrow cheaper from that pot than you can a commercial lender. I think the ones that have done it are Beer CLT, which is a great name for a CLT, and I think it might be Brighton. I think Brighton CLT did that too. So yeah, and I mentioned the Community Shares Booster Program. So we were really fortunate. We managed to convince them to not only put in 10 grand to help us develop our business plan. We then had a grilling, but we convinced them to put £100,000 of investment into the share offer too. So so what I would say with our funding for Lowfield, we've been quite good at spreading out the costs to different and accessing funding from different sources in different pots, because that's helped spread the risk, which means that, you know, ultimately the project's more likely to go ahead, because I think community-led housing projects can be considered high risk by lenders. Not so much ecology though. Ecology have been quite good, and Charity Bank are quite good too. So yeah. And I know I've already mentioned this, but yeah, we did the share offer that was this is probably not really worth going over that again. Bit of interesting stats though on the share offer, which was interesting to see, that only 43% of our investors were in York. So that was a really nice message from us, that we were, you know, it is a new model for the UK, and people nationally were interested in trying to see if this would work. And a lot of the feedback we were getting was that the affordability model, and actually a lot of people invested in sustainability too, but yeah, so that's quite a good breakdown. If you are thinking about your own share offers, try and target people. I know Leeds Community Homes were really supportive for YorSpace to develop their share offer, and they can offer support in terms of helping mapping and planning and things like that. So yeah, so that was the summary of our share offer. And I mentioned One Planet York as well. I'm going to share these slides, so you can click that link when you get the slides, but that's a link to how we've been doing a lot of work around trying to make sure our homes that we build do follow the One Planet Living principles. So we've created a spreadsheet that tracks all those things. So we're doing, again, it's that idea of really driving home what it is that you're doing, and we're going to be using that spreadsheet as a group of residents to try and find little pockets of funding for things. So, you know, if we're looking at sustainable food and wildlife, or we've been speaking to someone recently about how we can access grant funding for free trees and things like that. So yeah, just to really reiterate that, being really clear about your message and connecting into networks that already exist, like One Planet Living. And I think that's it. That's it. I feel like I've done a lot of talking there, and we're only 14 minutes over. So yes. So I'm really happy to stay on, answer questions. I appreciate. I've just regurgitated 6 years worth of information and stories there, but if people did want to stay on, I'm happy to. Yeah, please do fire away. And this is quite a small group, so if people did want to take off their you know, unmute themselves and video and stuff like that. I'm saying this actually, Lucy. How long do you want to stay for?
Well, I can always make you host.
That's true. Yeah. But I'd honestly be happy to stay till 8. But I appreciate people might not have had dinner, and it's my own poor time management that we're at this point now. So I may as well offer to stay on too.
I'd just like to say I've got to go actually, but it's been very, very useful and very informative. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the slides when they come out, and I'm sure the other members of Project Freedom will find it very educational.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks, Karen.
I'll send out this when I send out the slides. I'll send out the video. I'm going to put this on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Leeds Community Homes, so that if you've got other members or people that you'd think it would be useful for, then just forward the YouTube link on.
Great, that'd be fantastic. I'm sure they'll all be really interested, or they will by the time I finish talking to them anyway. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Karen. Nice to meet you.
James, thanks a lot. As a newbie to CLT, it's been really useful, but there's so much to take in.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's been brilliant. But I will be coming back probably for more information as I progress with the CLT. Really, Granby. So
no problem. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Darlene. Really nice to meet you.
And you.
Thanks, James. It's been really interesting. We're not a community land trust, but there's a lot of similarities in the sort of financing and, you know, as I said, there's quite the practical things. So it's been great. I do have to go and have my dinner, so
don't worry.
But yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. See you later.
Thanks, Alison. Bye.
See you on Monday, Lucy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for ukulele. I didn't know that about you two. That's a little bit
small world. Small.